We're waiting for everybody. I'm going to just bring my PowerPoint up and then in a few minutes we'll get started. Does that sound good with everybody? All right. All right, it looks like we have 18 participants right now. So I'll go ahead and get started and go through a presentation that I hope will be brief. And then hopefully we can have some input from residents of the first district tonight. This is an outreach hearing with the intent of providing an opportunity for the public to hear about the work that the advisory committee is doing and provide any input. And it's perfectly okay if people want to watch this and they feel like they don't really want to testify, because we know that that can be a little daunting sometimes, but there are other ways for them to testify and provide information on the website, emailing, and letting us know about their community of interest. I'm going to get started real quick just with a little welcome to everybody. The work we're doing is important work to help identify within the county the communities that should be the building blocks of the redistricting process. The role of the ARC is to, or the RAC, it's RAC or ARC, depending on the agency, but the role of the Redistricting Advisory Committee is to report to the county on information regarding the communities of interest that should be the building blocks by the end of September. Right now, we don't have actual redistricting data. So getting this information now will be helpful in their process. This two-phase process is really a function largely of the census data being several months late. We want to make sure that the redistricting process isn't slowed down by this, and that as soon as they have the actual census data, they can get ready to draw lines. This district mapping will continue into the fall. Right now, what we are really looking for is for people to be able to describe their community of interest and inform that part of the process. I have with us here a number of members of our Redistricting Advisory Committee broken into each of the districts. And we have the full list here. And I know we have a number of participants that are on the Zoom right now. The staff is pretty sizable. You have a lot of resources at your disposal. Michelle is on the Zoom. We have a number of other staff that are identified here that range from county staff to technical staff for the registrar of voters. Additionally, GIS staff and planning staff for the county. In addition to the staff that are from the county side, there's also the consultant team, which I lead. I'm Paul Mitchell. I'm the owner of Redistricting Partners. We also have Chris Chafee, who's done several redistrictings around the state, and he's the Chief Operations Officer. Sophia Garcia, who's really an expert in outreach and GIS, which is an uncommon pairing, but she comes from the world of community organizing with an emphasis on those technical tools that can be utilized to help identify communities. And Kimmy Shigatani, who's our Chief Administrative Officer and comes out of nonprofit world. She knows how to make the trains run on time and make sure that this process is carried out in an effective way and that we reach our goals and meet our deadlines. I'm going to cover a number of redistricting topics in order to make sure that the advisory committee is up to speed on the latest in redistricting and the policy around it, and also that the public understands what we're really trying to get at right now, which is that community of interest testimony and why. So redistricting is the process of rebalancing districts every 10 years. It is commonly thought of as having to do with congressional and legislative districts, but it's extremely common and necessary in local government as well, whether it's a city council or a water district or a school board or a county, any place that draws districts based on or any place that runs our elections based on districts has to make sure that those districts are roughly balanced. The reason we have to balance these districts is really twofold. One is that everybody should have equal opportunity to complain to their elected officials, get help from their elected officials. That is the idea of having representative power. It means that if I live on one side of a county, that I have the same ability to go reach out to my elected official, somebody who lives on the other side of the county. If we had districts that were crazy unbalanced, that might really get distorted. And one example that I like to use is we did a redistricting in an agency that hadn't redone their districts or rebalanced in 50 years. And over those 50 years, those districts that used to be balanced were now 12,000 on one side and 100,000 on the other. And if you live in a district of 100,000 and your cousin on the other side of town lives in a district with 12,000, that cousin has more voting power, has more representative power than you do. So balancing those out is a key part of making sure that this element in our democracy works. The county supervisors went through this process in 2011. So the rebalancing that will happen will be reflective of that 10-year population change. The board appointed this redistricting advisory committee to assist in the important work of reaching out to the community and learning about communities of interest. We're going to be conducting these community outreach hearings, drawing in public input and actually getting from the public, either in mapping or verbal or written forms, that testimony and report that to the county supervisors. The timeline is starting back in May, getting this committee together into June and late June, starting this series of outreach meetings. We expect that by September 23rd, the county will have access to the redistricting data, and that will be the appropriate time for us to provide the input on the communities of interest. And the current deadline for the county is December 15th to have the entire process done. So where you will be handing off your work on September 23rd, they, between that date over Halloween and Thanksgiving, heading towards Christmas holiday, they're going to be making the decisions about how to take those communities of interest and organize them into districts for the purposes of the redistricting. So there's a number of traditional criteria that's required in the redistricting process, no matter where you're doing redistricting around the country. And the most important of those and the most objective of those is maintaining communities of interest. The communities of interest as these building blocks, like I mentioned, it's subjective. So we want to look at people's own ideas about where their communities are. We will have some objective data. We'll have data from the census. We'll have information. Maybe somebody brings forward some listing of every community center that is a senior community center. That's objective data. But somebody's subjective data might be that they go to these certain community centers and they have these certain needs, and this is their community, and it's different than this other side of town. And that subjective information is what we want to try to obtain through this process. We want to be very inclusive and take in information from everybody who's willing to provide it. There are certain communities of interest that are covered by the Federal Voting Rights Act. Those communities of interest are those ethnic and sometimes religious language communities of interest. Largely in California, we mostly see Latinos, Asians, and African Americans. In other parts of the country, We're actually doing some redistricting in Alaska, so Alaskan natives can be important. We're doing some redistricting in other parts of the country in Arizona where the native populations, or in San Bernardino where the native populations are pretty significant. So we might see different communities being more represented in that Voting Rights Act element in different parts of the country. While we will look at all these communities of interest, and some communities of interest might identify themselves based on their racial or ethnic composition, it's important to note that that mere factor of racial or ethnic composition cannot be the predominant factor in drawing districts. We were on a redistricting last night, and somebody came forward and said that their community was largely a Black community, but this was their community of interest and where they lived and where they shopped and the issues that they had and the concerns that they had at the city council. And you could draw districts that take into account all of those elements that they were talking about that define their community of interest. But in this process, we're not going to say, well, that's the Black community of interest. We're going to talk about all the other things that bind that community together in order to not fall afoul of the Federal Voting Rights Act. There are other communities of interest that are critically important that are not given that kind of protection like the Federal Voting Rights Act. You can think about historical communities, economic interests like socioeconomic groupings, religious, cultural, ethnic communities, things about what languages might be spoken in certain communities, what amenities are available for different cultural amenities that might be available in different parts of the county. Neighborhoods are explicitly considered a community of interest, just like cities or census places. There's also communities of interest that might be defined by recreational or natural resources. So there's a number of different ways that we can think about these communities of interest. Maybe it's an arts district is a community of interest. So there's almost unlimited communities of interest. In Solano County, we did a redistricting where almond growers and walnut growers were communities of interest. You might have people who's come forward and say, I'm a cyclist and my community of interest is where I ride my bike around over Canelo Road. So all of these are potential communities of interest. The Fair Maps Act prohibits certain things from being considered communities of interest. So if somebody says, my community of interest is me, I'm a candidate for office and I want this district to be drawn in a way that helps me run for county supervisor, that cannot be a community of interest and you can't use that. If somebody says my community of interest is the Democratic Party or the Republican Party or the Libertarian Party, and the Libertarian Party wants to have a district that does this, well, that's not a community of interest either. So we're not allowed to treat those as communities of interest, even though historically we've seen a lot of gerrymandering done around these ideas. It's not something that will be utilized in our process, and we will not be informing the county supervisors of where the different political parties live or where people who might want to run for office live as a community of interest. It's also hard to consider some communities of interest because of the way that they may or may not be effective in the real goal of that community of interest testimony. The community of interest testimony in state law is to have identified communities of interest that can be placed in one or more districts in order to allow for their better political representation. So what about people who are maybe a community, they're similarly minded, but they're not sharing a similar location? Maybe they're in pockets of a bunch of different places. What about a community of interest that's just countywide? Let's say somebody says my community of interest is people who get sunburned. Well, you can get sunburned anywhere in Solano County. I'm proof of that. But that is not necessarily something that is mappable, the sunburn part of Solano County. So we're looking for these really three elements: the idea of a shared culture, a characteristic, something that people can say, my community of interest is X. We're also looking for where is that, how do you map it, what is the way to identify that physically. And then thirdly, what's that relationship back to the jurisdiction that's being redistricted? How does that impact the county supervisors? how does the work of the county supervisors affect the members of the public? In one redistricting, we had somebody come forward and articulate that a community of interest was somebody that gets harmed by government. And I laughed at that. But really, what it was trying to express was a community of interest is some group that the government and the way that the districts are drawn can be impacted by this, but the government is not meeting their needs. And if a government's not meeting their needs and they have a geographic location and they have a shared concern, then they are kind of by definition a community of interest, and they should be represented in the line drawing process. And that's what our job is here. So I'm going to give some examples of potential communities of interest and whether or not this would be a community of interest. And I can see a couple of faces, maybe give a nod or shake a head. A group of renters who live downtown testifies before the redistricting commission. Do you think that that would be a community of interest? I see nods. Yes, that would definitely be a community of interest because they've kind of checked all boxes, right? They've said, well, we're downtown, we're renters, so their identity is renters, their location is downtown. And we know that people who are renters and live in that area might have different interactions with the county government than maybe somebody who lives in a rural area. So a historically recognized town going back a long time, doesn't have a lot of population, but it's within the lines of the county. Should the county's redistricting commission prioritize this historical town when drawing maps? This one's a little trickier. Any thoughts? A little cock of the head. The actual is yes. In the law, historical communities is one of the defined types of communities of interest. So historical community, even if it doesn't have a lot of people, even if it's mostly a tourist trap now, that is still a potential community of interest. A group of dog owners living in the suburbs who band together to make sure that their little puppies get, cool water on hot days. Would they be a community of interest? I see a no, I see a yes. I'm going to say yes. Now there's a twofer on this. One is if that community of interest is coming forward and they're going to the community college redistricting meeting, maybe the community college, they don't have a class in associate's degree in dog walking. So it's maybe not a community of interest for them, but for whatever agency, make sure that there's water fountains at the dog park, or whatever agency, make sure that the paving of the roads on the way to the dog park, those would be the agencies where they might have a need and be a community of interest. A statewide group for fans of maligned Winter Olympic sports testifies to the local city redistricting commission. So they're probably people really upset about people making fun of that sport where they do the brooms on the ice, or they don't like luge jokes. Are they a community of interest? Clearly, no. They could be entertaining, but they're not a community of interest. The group of people who want to support Olympic sports is probably statewide, and there's not really a governmental agency that's going to have a say over their concerns. So in defining these communities of interest, there's going to be different methods in which the public can engage. There's going to be a community of interest form that is on the website to allow for people to have that input and describe their community of interest and kind of describe each of those three elements. What's their community of interest? What is their geographic footprint? And how does it relate to governance? There's also going to be map submissions, online mapping, that will be coming online that will allow for two different types of input. Community of interest maps, which will be drawing lines that can be available now through the end of the process. And then district maps that'll be based on 2020 census data once that data is released. District R is the program, or District R is the program we'll be utilizing as a mapping tool. That mapping tool is up. You can go, that mapping tool is available for the state of California, that you can go to that link. And we will be having a Solano specific mapping tool available on the website as well. We will be also having laminated maps available for people to use in person, so that they can see the county, and draw their area and describe it. And then in the future, have that mapping tool so that they can draw draft districts and even sum up the populations and kind of get a estimated population for each of the districts that they draw. And there's a number of hearings coming up. So right now we're in a community of interest or a community outreach hearing. There's going to be multiple more of these going through July and into August. And it's from that and this process and any forms and input that's received outside of these meetings that will build our community of interest report. For more information, you can always go to redistricting.solanocounty.com. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and we will have an opportunity for people to raise their hand and be called on if they want to make some public testimony. I see a hand raised from Brenda Mitchell.
Hi, thank you very much. I have a question regarding the mapping tool. I tried to find it and it appears there's one that isn't available yet. And it sounds like you mentioned two different type of mapping tools. You mentioned the district map and then the community of interest map. Are both available now? And if so, if you could repeat that online link.
Yeah, so I believe, and Kimmy can correct me or she can come on and let me know when this is going to be available. I don't believe that map is up yet. We did a demonstration of it, and I could do a demonstration using the state of California because Districtor is available online to go play around with. We just don't have the Solano specific version up for you yet. I think that Districtor has the data files they need to create it, and I would expect for us to be able to have access to it in the coming weeks.
So the Solano specific one, do you have a time frame when that will be available?
A couple weeks or a few weeks, yeah.
And so we'll be notified via this link, I assume.
We will be really excited to share it with you as soon as it's available.
Okay, and I'll be looking out for that. Thank you.
Of course. If you have a question, feel free to just raise your hand, or if a member of the public has come on and watched this and wants to give any input. I do see one more raised hand. Nope. I think that might have been the original raised hand. If there aren't any other.
Well, actually, I do have another question.
Another raised hand. All righty, let's do it.
The same person, actually. So thank you. I'm looking at the community of interest form. Could you take a moment and just go through those questions, and if anybody need clarification, you can address that, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let me go ahead and get that together. I'm just going to grab the form real quick and see if I can bring it up on the screen. All righty. Let me close that and bring this up, and we will give that a shot. It's a great idea. All righty. So this is the community of interest form that is on the website, and it does ask for your name and an email address and a phone number. This is clearly states in here that won't be made public, but it's to use if there's any clarifying questions. And then there's this question about, are you a resident of Solano County? Now, some people have said, well, we only want to hear from residents of Solano County, but if somebody wanted to give testimony from, say, League of Women Voters, Common Cause, MALDEF, Asian Americans Advancing Justice, any of the other groups that are around the redistricting space, it'd be perfectly appropriate for them to use this as a vehicle for giving testimony, or for them to email into the commission to give that kind of testimony. What is the nature of your community, the social or economic interest? And in here, you can describe, say, my community of interest is dog walkers, and describe what that community of interest means to you. Where is your community located? Here, I might say above the 80 and, near the Denny's. And then what geographic definers boundary, other ways that you could describe it with, more context. And sometimes people will know maybe like street names. Other times they might not know street names, but they might just say, well, I walk my dog to the park near my house. Now, this one is important, which is, what is the rationale for your community to be considered a community of interest in the redistricting effort? So what would the drawing of lines do to have an impact on your group? So if I'm the dog walkers, I might say, well, it makes no sense that all this community of ours that lives in a community where we all take walks. In my neighborhood, people walk their dogs just like right down the middle of the street, and we all go to the same kind of area when we walk our dogs. How would being in different districts impact that? And then you can also put information about what do you like or dislike about your lines. This is something that might be helpful as we define these communities of interest, because there might be some people who, when asked this question, they can more clearly define that their community of interest is split by the existing boundaries, or that they're currently kept whole in the existing boundaries, and that's something they want to preserve or not. And then there's a space for putting any additional comments. Hopefully they're saying thank you for the opportunity to give input to the redistricting committee. But whatever additional input they have, they can put that there and then just submit it. They can also check this box to receive an email copy of the form so that they have access to that. We might also, in this process, if we get to a point where we have people who are coming before us, encourage people to have them or their neighbors provide these forms. One question we get oftentimes is, well, what happens with these forms after we're done? What we will do is any forms that are submitted, we will have access to all those raw forms, for one. Secondly, we'll have an Excel document that kind of goes through each of the forms with a little bit of a summary of each of them, so that we can use that as we construct a report to the county. Tiffany, do you have a question?
Just more of a comment. And thanks for doing a great job on the presentation. Again, it's always kind of good to kind of get the reminders around communities of interest and what it is that we're tasked to do. I just wanted to say and go on record with the public, at this point in juncture, I think it's really important that we start having these conversations as far as District 1. Most of us are, represented in Vallejo, but there's also another half that goes into District 2. And so just start having these conversations with your communities of interest. And as soon as the District R is up, I'm encouraging everybody to submit as much public comment and get these maps in, because this is what we're going to have to we're going to have to bring this before the Board of Supervisors for them to make a decision. And I'd rather have 50, potential maps and testimony rather than 4 or 5, right? Because that's not representative of who we are as District 1. So I'm definitely encouraging. I went through this process with Vallejo, myself, and Mina Diaz when we did the districting in Vallejo 2 years ago. And so Vallejo's up again for citywide, but this is also very important. Just make sure you draw a map. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it just shows what you're interested in, and so that we at least have some feedback. I live in a completely different part of District 1, right? My community of interest is very different than, maybe Brenda's or, Alex's. So all of those voices need to be heard. I can't express this enough. This is going to change the trajectory of what we are looking at for the next 10 years. We have to kind of settle with that. So I don't know, after you come from this hearing, I need all of y'all to tell 5 or 6 friends to be at the next couple of meetings, provide testimony, go on record and say that this is a community of interest. We have to start getting involved because this is going to wrap up really, really, really soon. And again, the staff is more than ready and available to answer any of your questions. And I'll be honest, this is probably the better organized districting meeting that I've sat in. So I just want to say thank you to the staff for doing this, but really urging everybody in District 1, not just District 1, but all the districts to really get involved with this. Start submitting these maps as soon as the district R is ready, or if you have a napkin and you've drawn something on the napkin, get it to where it needs to go so that at least we can start looking at something. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Since we have an extra minute, I will show real quickly the mapping tool and how it works. This is the tool that is being set up for Solano County. This is just looking at it in the statewide version of the program. And essentially what it allows you to do is see the county. In this case, you see all this other part. You see Napa County and other things. So it's not set up just for Solano. But you could go in here and say, well, I'm a cyclist and my community of interest is up here to Manacus Corner. I love that area. And I always park my bike down here. And I like, riding over to Vacaville, and that's my community of interest. And once you have a community of interest that you've defined, you can then name it, describe it, and then once you've done that, you can save it. And this saving of it literally just gives you a link. That link now, I could email that, or I could right now in our meeting, go ahead and put that in. I don't see a chat. Let me see if I have a chat here. Well, if you guys type that in, or if I put that in the chat, this would allow anybody to come into the website, click on that, and they'd be able to see that map, that community of interest, Manacus, my cycling community. And if they zoomed in down there, they would see that exact area that I just drew. And this area is not only something that has been given now a name and a description. I could look and see, well, this will show me the county borders. Oh, I was outside of the county. I'm in Napa there. But not only be able to show my communities, my neighborhoods, I could look at other areas. I could look at ethnic composition of the area, but most importantly, I could save it and share it. And you can also download it and send it out or print it. There's all kinds of tools here for you to be able to share this information. When you do it, you can also tag this. So the Solano County version will have a special tag just for Solano County. So if people put in the Solano County tag, it hasn't been set up yet, but let's say it's Solano County. Then when you shared this, like on Twitter, you could have people come and click on that tag and see all the maps that have been produced by other members of the community that all shared that same tag. So there's a lot of great tools here. It's very simplified for the purposes of helping people identify their community of interest in the districting process. And these kinds of map submissions will allow us to then overlay all this information and give real robust input to the county supervisors. Brenda, is that another raised hand, or is that your raised hand from before?
It is another raised hand.
I love it. The Mitchells are coming today. Thank you.
And I'm looking at this from an educator's perspective, and I'm looking at the interest map. and number 3 and number 5. And I'm thinking, if a person is not aware of the geographic definers, could you add a link so they could at least see their district boundaries? I'm trying to put the boundaries on here to have them go to one stop if possible, or tell them how to get to see their boundaries, have a link somewhere. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, we can look at it. So
Yeah.
since this is the implementation on the statewide map that I was showing, I don't think it doesn't have the ability to see your county boundaries. I don't know if your county supervisor lines will be built into that system, but we can look into that and let you know.
Okay.
And if they aren't readily available, we can work with the staff to make sure that a map of the existing county boundaries is available as well.
I think that's going to be very important, Paul, because like I said, District 1, it literally stacks right up against District 2, which could be confusing to people that don't know how to look at a map or don't have a trained eye to kind of see that. It's literally a street and a census block that separates them. So
Yeah,
it'd be great to have that.
great.
Well, this is Michelle.
Michelle,
Hi, how are you?
great.
I did want to just note to the community that we actually do have the existing boundary maps up on our website. If you look at the top right-hand corner at the menu, there's a map menu item. If you click on that, there's existing boundaries. So you'll be able to see the existing boundaries. But like Paul said, as we get into the redistrictor, we'll try and put those boundaries in there. We'll let you know if we're able to do that. But if you're wanting to look at the existing boundaries right now, you can certainly look on our website, and we've put brand new maps up based on existing lines.
Great. So I'll bring up the shared screen real quick and just show that, since Michelle pointed that out. So existing boundaries are here, and it looks like this is the overview. So you can see where District 1 and District 2 are relative to each other. But you can also see them kind of in their zoomed in element. And this is where we would have proposed boundaries, approved boundaries, and also where we will have the districting tool available. Your staff has done an excellent job on that. That is a really clean looking website for this. So unless there's more questions, is that still the same question from before?
Well, that's an applause. I mean, I really like.
That's an applause
I
hand.
do.
Well, then that's for
No,
Michelle. Michelle, you got an applause hand.
Yeah, and I saw that, and I thought, well, if we can get that link on the community of interest forum, that's just
Great.
another connection. So yeah, I
We
love
appreciate that.
that.
Well, with that, I think that we can conclude. The real goal here is to make sure that we're reaching out to the community, that the community has access to this information. And we'll continue to hold these hearings with me or Sophia Garcia, who's been on this call as well, helping guide through this overview, and hoping that we can get more input from the community through any of those different methods that we've made available. And with that, I'd like to thank you and thank the staff for helping put this all together. Thank you very much. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Paul, quick question for you. Are we gonna have recordings posted on the website of the sessions?
This should be getting recorded, and I'm sure, Michelle, do you have an answer for that?
I do. So yes, the meetings are being recorded. Last week's meeting is busy being edited. I forgot to turn the meeting off, so I have to cut a whole chunk off the back piece of it. Otherwise, you'll have a 2-hour meeting going. So as soon as I've done that, I will get it posted up on the website, and then yeah, you'll see these every week.
Perfect.
And so, you know, all this content is managed by the It has to be kept on the county's website for 10 years. So you can wave to the 2030 commission anytime you'd like. They're there watching you. Thanks. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you both.
Thanks, Paul. Nice job.